Welcome to the Strategic Marketer Podcast, where we talk about strategies, tactics, and practical steps to help you become a more strategic marketer. I'm your host, Joseph Lewin, and today I'm speaking with Hailey Wilson. Hailey is an account executive at HubSpot that focuses on mid-market sales. Now you might be asking, why are you having a salesperson on a marketing podcast? Well, today, Hailey and I are talking about sales alignment or sales enablement, where marketing and sales come together. Now, in the B2B space, marketing and sales are always going to be intertwined. You can't completely separate them. Although at many companies, they act as if they're two completely separate entities. And so we're going to be talking about how HubSpot does it, how they get alignment between their sales and marketing team because they are very good at it, and some of Hailey's previous experience trying to get alignment between the marketing and the sales team. So buckle up, it's going to be a good one. In the sales space, it's easy to feel like people have to like you. I feel like that's kind of something that people commonly feel when they're in the sales role and trying to figure that out with customers. But how important is it to be liked by your prospects as a salesperson?
Yeah, this one for me, was a tough kind of pill to swallow and a tough thing to come to the realization to, because I always thought, you think of your stereotypical salesperson, rubbing elbows, chatting, building jokes, building rapport and that sort of thing. And I think all of those things are important in sales, right? But I don't necessarily think that makes you a good or a great salesperson, right? I'm not saying like, go around being mean or like not treating people right or not, don't build rapport with your prospects or that sort of thing. But I think that there's more to sales than that, right? And I think I came to that realization earlier in the year. I read a book called The Challenger Sale. It's basically just like a study over the span of a couple of years where they looked at the best performing like sales folks, and they kind of categorize them into a couple of different categories. And surprisingly enough, as I was reading this book, it said like, the relationship driven buddy salesperson was actually like one of the worst performing types of salespeople that there could be. Yeah.
That's really fascinating.
And it was really interesting. And they categorized the most effective salesperson, right, as what's called like the challenger seller, right? And it is what it sounds like, right? Challenger sellers are totally okay with, presenting conflicting opinions, challenging the prospect. Again, not in a rude way, but challenging their point of view. They're open to talking about money and budget and decision making, and they don't undervalue their process or undervalue their product or their service that they're selling. So essentially, they help educate prospects, teach prospects, and take control of prospects throughout the process. And so after reading that book, I'm like, man, that's something that I need to actively work on and actively focus on in my conversations, because I'm a super, high D, high I. I'm very extroverted, want to be friends with everyone. But I think that the more, sales professionals and even marketing professionals can get comfortable with challenging their prospects, I think that that's going to be more effective in the long run.
So you mean if I want to get into sales and be successful, I don't have to necessarily perfect my golf game if I'm going to be successful?
No. And I used to think, and I used to think that, right? You kind of almost like wine and dine, you kind of have to do that in order to make a sale. And I mean, those things are important along the way, but I don't think that separates good from great salespeople, right? So it's a hard thing for people like me to swallow, but I think, like I said, it pays off in the long run a ton when you learn that that's not the most important part, of selling.
So then, if likability isn't necessarily at the top of the list, and I think it sounds like you're kind of pushing it back against the idea that you have to like bend over backwards and never say anything controversial so that this person likes you. And if they want a discount, then always being willing to like cut your pricing for them or things like that. Those things come to mind when you want to be likable and you want to build a friendship with somebody. But I mean, even in the real world, if you're going to build lasting friendships, ones that produce, good quality relationships over time.
Mm-hmm.
If you bend over backwards like that and you never say anything challenging or controversial, you're probably not going to have really good friends in the long run either.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of going along with what you said. You never, the way I look at it is you never want to be like a shadow friend. That friend that always encourages you in everything and never really challenges your point of viewpoint. That friend or your significant other, spouse. You don't want to always, kind of go with the flow. It's okay to challenge, the status quo. I think it's okay to challenge people throughout the sales process too.
Yeah, and in fact, it kind of brings to mind, I think it was from Ryan Deiss from Digital Marketer. I think that's where I heard it from. So hopefully I don't want to give people kudos where it's due them. But they were talking about getting out of the friend zone, and that with marketing and in sales, it's the same way. Like you can give so much value, but if you're never challenging people and never kind of asking them to make some kind of a commitment where they're actually giving you something in return, whether that's some time or revealing something about their budget or whatever it might be, something that they're going to have to give something into the relationship. And if you don't do that as you're going along because you're so concerned about making the person happy and keeping them happy, then you end up being in the friend zone. Nobody wants to be in the friend zone. You want to, move to the next level of your relationship. And, it's kind of a similar idea to building a relationship with a prospect. You don't want to be in that friend zone, where they are going to you so they can get lower pricing or so they can figure something else out and, get as much as they can from you, but not actually bring you into the decision-making process because they feel like you're not necessarily adding value besides maybe revealing hidden information they didn't have before.
Exactly. And it's like the old, quote, adage, whatever, like growth only happens when you're uncomfortable, right? And so it's important to have those uncomfortable conversations of like, yeah, like you think this is the best solution for you, but I'm going to tell you, I've worked with 5 other businesses who have had that same problem as you in the way the solution you think is correct. It's not, I kind of have that experience there. And so I think, again, just being open to being that challenger. Like you said, it even translates beyond sales and marketing. It translates to, I think just life experiences and building healthy relationships with the people around you as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you're describing that, more of that challenger idea where it's likability, I'm thinking of people who are more in the services. So, if it's an accountant or if you're going to a mechanic or a doctor, you don't go in there expecting that person to, take you out to dinner. You go in there
right?
and, I'm just thinking specifically a mechanic, you take your car in and there's something wrong with your car. You're going to the mechanic to have your car diagnosed. Right?
Yeah.
And then they're going to look at your car and they're probably going to give you some bad news. And I mean, who wants to spend money on their car? So you're not exactly happy to be there. You're not excited about what they're going to tell you, but you're coming to them because they're, more in that trusted advisor role. They are going to challenge you and they're going to lay out some things that maybe you hadn't thought about and give you a different outlook on things and say, hey, this is something that is really important. And, this is something you might be able to hold off on. But I'm just thinking it's interesting if you think in terms of that kind of a relationship, you would never expect that person to buy you lunch in order to get a meeting. So, reframing that a little bit is helpful.
Yeah. It's like, well, yeah, like, why do we think in, any sort of B2B marketing or sales that it has to be any different,
Yeah. And it actually builds trust. Like when somebody is honest with you and upfront and they're not overly buttering you up where, like, okay, when's the hard sell coming? When's the hard pitch coming? When they're not doing that, but they give you something to really chew on that you hadn't thought of. It's like, wow, I really trust this person more and I'm more likely to ultimately go with them, even if they're more expensive, if they taught me something, if they helped me to understand the problem better, the situation, gave me a new perspective I hadn't thought of before.
Yeah. And it's just, establishing yourself as like a thought leader, right? Like you're a thought leader, you're open to challenging them and teaching them and showing them a new point of way. And I just think about like, I don't know, think of any enjoyable sales process that you had. And for me, things that come to mind aren't like, oh, this person was really nice or like this person was, great at, being, this person had great sales technique. It's like, no, and there's nothing more exciting to me, right? When you're making a purchase and like you really, like you had said, Joseph, you feel like you're like learning like during the sale. Like that's
Yeah.
exciting when you walk away and you're like, oh my gosh, like I came in here thinking I was going to get a solution. And not only did I get a solution, like I know why I'm in this pain that I'm in, or I know why I'm going through this purchasing process. And you walked away with not only a potential solution, but like this other knowledge that you can apply. To me, that's a game changer. That's what gets people really excited and invested in whatever, type of solution you provide, whether it's a product or a service.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in the B2B space, it's a little bit different than business to, B2C, the business to consumer world, because you're typically not having a one and done sale in B2B.
Mm-mm.
So when somebody buys from you, it's really not a close. My friend Brian Wallace was talking about this the other day. He's like, it's not a close. It's the beginning of a relationship.
Yep.
It's really the opening. So when somebody signs a deal with you, and I know with HubSpot, that's certainly true. That when somebody buys from you, it's just the beginning. And if you've done something to trick that person or manipulate them, and honestly, when I think back of sales that like you're saying, salespeople I've worked with, it's the people who were more concerned about helping me to understand something and walking me through the process and like illuminating things for me and being patient. Those are the people that I still have long-term business relationships with. Mm-hmm. But when I think of the people who are those more the relationship side, where I did really like them up front, a lot of times I kind of have a bad taste in my mouth because it didn't really, I leave that sale and in the moment I felt good about it, but I walk out the door and I'm like, I still have some questions about this that I feel like weren't quite answered.
This week's episode of The Strategic Marketer is brought to you by the Brand Compass course. If you're looking to take your marketing services side hustle to the next level, the Brand Compass course is for you. In the course, you're going to learn how to identify your ideal customers and narrow down to serve a niche market. Then you're going to learn how to productize your offering so that it's easier for customers to understand exactly what you do for them. And then you're going to put all of this information into a one-page messaging guide. That way you can use your customer's language to speak exactly to their pain points and problems every single time. Check out the show notes for a link to the course.
Let's move on to kind of a slightly different topic. So something else that we talked about is when a prospect doesn't feel the pain of a problem, or they don't think they're experiencing the problem that the salesperson has. What does that mean? What does that kind of trigger in your mind, and how do you approach a prospect that's in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think, kind of similar to, our first kind of topic, and it's a hard pill to swallow, but I think, again, the difference between good and great salespeople is that great sales folks don't spend their time chasing after opportunities that aren't ready for them and that aren't a good fit for them, that aren't in enough pain to interact or to do business with them, right? So, before working at HubSpot, I worked at two companies. One was a really true startup, and one was a little bit more of a tenured company, but kind of still had a startup sort of feel. So needless to say, right, I've been in a position where I didn't have leads coming in like I do at HubSpot, right? And it's a very different feeling when you're not getting 5 to 6 MQLs every single day. You're lucky if you're getting one every 2 weeks, right? So I've been in that position where it's difficult to turn down opportunities or to be open to turning down opportunities. But the more I think about the times and the deals I worked with some of these smaller companies that ended up bursting to flames after they were closed and ended up not being good fits after they were closed, it's because, one, obviously I didn't do my job either detecting that there wasn't enough pain, or I prescribed, a solution that wasn't correct. Or two, I mean, I guess kind of similar to one, like I was trying to fit a square peg in a round hole or something like that, right? And so I think as a sales rep, especially if you don't have leads coming in, it's extremely difficult to be like, yeah, no, this one lead that came in that I, got for the first time in 3 weeks, like, I'm not going to chase it. They're not enough pain. But I think that the more you recognize good fits versus bad fits, the better you get at question asking to really identify pain, the more successful your product or service is going to be. And the best example I can give of this is, I've started asking questions when talking to companies that are exploring HubSpot, asking them about their current tech setup and saying like, well, gee, Mr. or Mrs. Prospect, like, it sounds like your current setup is really working well for you. Like, why did you even want to take this call, or why are you even exploring HubSpot? And almost like making it their job to be like, I'm in this pain and I'm hurting and I need a solution like yours.
Yeah, that's excellent. I love that line of questioning. I've even, my former life when I was sweeping chimneys, I was in a very heavy, there's a very heavy sales.
Oh yeah.
Service and sales. And I remember when people would bring up the competition at first, when I was first enrolled, you're kind of thinking like, oh, we're better, features and benefits. Here's why you should work with us. And we have, A+ rating in the middle, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But I started just being like, man, they're a great company. They do good work. And then what would invariably happen when I say that is they would go, well, I did have this question about them, and here's what they said that I wasn't really super excited about or whatever. And they start, talking bad about this other company. And I'm like, oh man, wow, that's kind of surprising, and then they're like, oh no. Yeah. And they like double down on it. So when you open up for people to answer those kinds of questions and you're not as forceful. I mean, you're not trying to force them into a certain answer, but at the same time, it kind of goes back to that first thing of you're challenging them, and you're kind of pushing back on them and being like, almost in a sense, not saying it this way, but like, are you wasting my time by calling me here? Like, it's you must have called me for a reason, but I'm not quite seeing what it is. And then that gives them the opportunity to either say, here's really what it is, or,
you're right. Yeah. Yeah, no. And I think and from both a marketing and a sales perspective, any company that's like doesn't believe that there are other competitors out there that are doing stuff better than them or are doing stuff just as great as them. Any companies that don't believe that, I mean, that's crazy talk, right? There's millions of different companies providing millions of different products and solutions, and part of, your role as a marketer or salesperson is to, like you had said, Joseph, be able to recognize like, hey, yeah, you're exploring, X versus Y. Well, yeah, I mean, here at X, we have, this. Y, I'll be honest, here's where they excel. But at the end of the day, here's why we're better, again, prescribed for the pain that you're having. And I think the more you're able to speak to that, and the more that you're even open to speak to that, and like you had said, not just start rattling off like, oh, we got all these awards and we're better because of this, and this. I think the better position that you're going to be in, not only to close a sale, but also for the long run and for keeping up that good relationship, both on like a business level and like a individual level, kind of like you had mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and I've seen it in different sales teams where they are trying so hard to create pain that the person just isn't really experiencing, or to attribute pain to a problem that the prospect isn't really seeing. And we might know as the practitioner that this really is, that the root of what they're experiencing or their challenge is coming from this. But if they're not seeing that, how, from your perspective, how hard should you be pushing when the person doesn't seem to be connecting those dots between, the pain they're experiencing and the problem, their perceived problem, or, when those things aren't quite aligning, how hard do you push them to try to push on that pain?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one, right? Because I think that there's only so much you can do. Like you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. Again, another classic, adage, but if I ask you, questions about, okay, what happens if you don't achieve these growth goals? How is it going to impact you personally? How is it going to impact the business overall? And, you're sharing things like we might have to, cut members of our team, or, we're not going to hit our growth goal, which leads to X and Y, and you're still not open to exploring a solution. There's not much I can do for you there, and for me, I'm not going to And it's taken me a while to recognize this, but I'm not going to spend hours working on a demo and putting together a quote and doing all this stuff for someone that if they don't recognize that pain. I'll, put them on a drip campaign and hope that in a month or so they recognize like, oh crap, this is bigger than I thought it was. And, we can re-engage at that point. But I think, if you do a good job of asking those hard hitting questions, you allow them to discover that pain. And if at the end of the day, they still don't have any sort of urgency after you've done a good job of laying out like, okay, like here's where this is going. If you don't make a change, if they don't see that, I don't think there's anything that you can do about that as a salesperson, or should do. You never want to corner someone into a sale if you don't feel like they're ready for it. So with solid questioning, if they still don't see it, in that case, like I said, I'm putting them on a campaign and waiting to touch base with them in a couple of weeks/months.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And I think that's a huge challenge with people in sales because there's pressure, there's pipeline reviews and quotas and all this stuff. So people feel a lot of pressure. And I think it's easy to get the eye off of what the goal should be, which is to serve this customer and to make their life better. And if they're not seeing it and you're not helping them, how does hounding them by making 6 extra phone calls to them over the course of a week, how is that helping? Is that really
and it's not
for them or for you at that point?
Yeah, it's not. Yeah. And at some point, right, if they're just simply not ready, I think by not being respectful of that, you can put a bad taste in their mouth by hounding them, like you had said, like, hey, Mr. Prospect, we talked last week. Are you ready now? Like, there's only so much you can do. And it's just about, working with marketing, honestly, to continue to nurture those types of prospects until they're at that kind of tipping point.
Strategic Marketer is brought to you in part by Thrive Themes. Thrive Themes is a killer visual WordPress editor. They've also recently launched editable themes so that you can edit every element of your WordPress theme. You can create amazing landing pages that are beautiful and conversion focused. They've built all of their products around helping you convert more leads into customers. You can find out more about Thrive Themes by clicking the link in the show notes. Yeah, well, that's a great segue into something that is really important. I mean, this is really an important part, and why I want to have you on the podcast, because in business to business industry, marketers have to understand sales. They have to understand the sales process. For the majority of business to business marketing, people aren't going on your website and buying a 39-cent widget. It gets delivered to their house. I mean, there is some of that, but for the most part, we're working with the sales team, and they're going to have a complex sale, in varying degrees of complexity. And so then as a marketing person, we have to be able to understand how do marketing and sales align. If we don't understand what you guys are doing, I mean, you're really closer to the customer. You're much closer to the customer than the marketing person is. And so if we don't understand what you're experiencing and how to help you in that process, then I don't think we can really be that effective in the business to business space. So how important, and I know you have some experience with this from HubSpot, and then, maybe you could speak to some of lacking this in other places, but how important is messaging alignment between sales and marketing, and what role does that play?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that alignment period, not even just messaging alignment, but alignment is super, super crucial between sales and marketing. Right. And as you said, we preach this like crazy at HubSpot. So right now I'm super keen to it. But by aligning, I think, both your sales and marketing teams, you're really enabling your company, right, to provide a really like seamless transition from like across your marketing journey, your sales journey, and then even further than that, like your customer service journey and their experience with your company internally, right? And I just think by aligning all of those, it's just going to make for just a much more successful experience for your end buyer. Like I said, I mean, HubSpot, I think they do a great job of that. But I mean, and I kind of talked about with you, Joseph, in our previous conversation, but I mean, you go on our website, if you look around at our products and you decide you want to book a meeting, with a salesperson to learn a little bit more, you want to book a demo, you're going to see the exact same verbiage. You're going to hear the exact same pitch that you see on the site, whether it's from a blog that you read, a LinkedIn post, just our product pages. Like, you're going to see and experience that same exact verbiage in a call, right? Internally, when you actually get on the phone with the salesperson. I use the marketing materials to sell. I have the marketing materials pulled up, and I use that, as like a guide, right, to having any of those conversations. So aligning it, like I said, it's going to provide a really smooth experience for buyers. It's going to allow your salespeople to make a truly like educated, informative sale. And it's going to create trust, I think, throughout the process. Because again, just thinking back to different buying experiences that I've had, like, I bought a new car last year, and I had an excellent purchasing experience in that I looked it up online. I went down to the showroom. The price, the product, what was available, the delivery date, all of that was the exact same when I went and talked to a person. And then, customer service wise, when they followed up with me after, like, it was just so dang consistent. It's one of the best buying experiences I've ever had. And it makes you trust that business, that they're going to provide, exactly what they say that they're going to provide. But ultimately, right, I think getting that alignment is really important. It's not always easy to do when you're, at a smaller company. Right. But it's very, very important.
Yeah. I mean, it's not easy in some ways, but in other ways, I think it's easier because you're closer to, those departments could be closer together. Like maybe you have an office. Yeah. I mean, for me,
exactly.
Right now I have an office next to my sales guy that I work with pretty closely. And so, in that case, we can have marketing and sales alignment, but I think that's more of something that people in the marketing department and sales department have to understand the value of working together where they feed into each other, but then also being able to drive the value of that and show the value of that to people who are executives or people who are, the decision makers at internally, so that you can really see that alignment coming from the top. And if it's not aligned from the top all the way through the people who are implementing it, it's going to be hard to get that level of alignment. But what are maybe you could give me some specific examples of marketing and sales being aligned and that messaging being aligned at HubSpot?
Yeah. I would say like one of the biggest and I think easiest ways that we do it at HubSpot that anyone listening to this could, literally do as they're listening to it on their phone or computer, or whatever, is by creating like buyer personas, right? That's a super easy way to, I guess, from the start, like really align both sales and marketing teams. At HubSpot, I mean, we have these created and throughout training and ramp and all that, we're educated on these buyer personas. But on the flip side, like I mentioned earlier, I've worked at companies where I've helped create, the buyer personas as a salesperson. And so by creating those buyer personas together, right, one, from a sales perspective, you're going to be able to target the correct buyers, right? You're not going after marketing managers when you really need to be targeting, VPs of finance or something like that, right? Two, you're able to speak directly to those buyer pain points because again, the marketing team's and the sales team can work together to help create that verbiage of, okay, here's the most common pain points for our different buyer personas. And then three, sales, right, and marketing can continue to work together to relay back any sort of data or results or trends that they're seeing in the process to continue to refine and perfect those buyer personas, right? And again, I think it's just going to add a lot more like consistency and predictability for both marketing and sales. But I think that that's a really easy way to an easy first step to align teams if people haven't already. I know something like buyer personas can be like, oh yeah, okay, like really we need to like go through this almost like middle, like college like marketing 101 class of making
Right.
and understanding buyer personas, but it's super important, right? And anyone that I reach out to and
Absolutely.
I'm targeting, I'm keeping in mind like, okay, here's, your marketing Mary and your, vice president Pam and all that. And you're
Right.
from a sales approach, you're able to target those people. And then from a marketing approach, that's who you're writing, creating content for,
Yeah.
trying to market to.
And the bigger your company is, the more that's important, because you can't keep all of the language in your head about all of the different perspectives. It's going to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
pretty complicated. And then to keep that consistent in everybody's head, it's going to be hard. So if you're a one-man band
Yeah.
and you have one salesperson that you work with, it's, you might get away with not doing that. But if you have multiple salespeople and multiple marketing people, how can you create consistent language that's really going to speak to somebody if you don't have it written down somewhere?
You can't.
And focused, like you're saying, with a persona or doing something like that. So that's excellent.
Yeah. And I mean, I've kind of experienced both sides of it, in that I worked at a marketing agency, and I was one of two salespeople. And so, the types of businesses that we like to work with, our personas were pretty limited. I think we had 5 or 6 personas, right? Fast forward, now I'm at HubSpot and we have 5 hubs and counting, and one's for sales, one's for marketing, one's for, customer service, one's CMS, one's ops. And so you start looking at all those different product verticals, you start thinking about all the different decision makers within all of those. Yeah. And without having those personas to categorize it, there's just no way you could be effective from a marketing or a sales perspective.
Yeah. And then I think another important part is that marketing and sales, it's not just, somebody visits your website, they go through your funnel, then they fill out a form and they're dropped into your sales pipeline, and then they go to sales, and now they go through the sales pipeline, and then sales drops them off to implementation and customer service. They really are aligned, and, to use some HubSpot terminology, just with that flywheel where things are going back and forth between the two. And, they kind of, you're constantly having people go back and forth. And, for example, you were saying with the sales person, if their pain points aren't there, you'll put them into a drip campaign. And then that's where, if your marketing people understand your sales process, then they're going to create a drip campaign for people who are exactly in that spot. And then it can, come back over to you and hand back off over to you after a certain amount of time.
Exactly. And then that's recently happened to me. I had a prospect that I was reaching out to. I wasn't able to get a hold of them. He ended up going on our website. I'm reading some article about something, was inspired by the article on the website that he read. I think it was about like blog creation and how important that was. And just like, 2 weeks after I had been kind of prospecting, trying to kind of crack a conversation with him, ended up coming back around and booking a meeting, right? So it's not always a seamless journey. You bounce here, and then they're not interested, they bounce back, and then they read something or, get a piece of content that kind of speeds it up a little bit. And so, yeah, I mean, alignment's crucial. And I think, no matter what size of company you are, the more aligned you are, the more effective you're going to be, for sure.
Yeah, well, let's just round it off with this, and you can keep this pretty brief. The kind of bullet point answer. And I know you already touched on one, but what are a few practical steps that marketing people can take? And say that you're not working at a HubSpot and you want to start implementing more of this sales and marketing enablement. What are a few practical steps that a marketing person can take? Yeah.
So, I mean, one, like I kind of mentioned, the creating buyer personas. There are tons of tools out there. I know HubSpot has a tool where you literally can do it for free. Another tool, and it's like so silly, or not even a tool, but another concept. I think a lot of times sales and marketing teams just like don't even interact, or like don't even try to work together. And so it can be as simple as putting heads together and sitting down and having a weekly, strategy session, or a weekly brainstorming session. And just kind of talking through some of these things. I think there's often a really big disconnect between the way, people are selling and the way marketing teams are marketing. And because the teams don't interact, right? No one really knows where the disconnect is. Yeah. So I think it's not a magic bullet or anything, but I think something as simple as like having a weekly brainstorming session, where, you talk through potential campaign ideas, sales can share like, hey, here are some common pain points that we've been seeing a ton this week. Marketing can share like, hey, here's some of the campaigns we're seeing a lot of buzz from. Here's, targets, prospects you can target. I think something as simple as just taking the time to like brainstorm and create, generate conversations between two teams is a great way to do it. Another kind of tool, and it's a little bit of a shameless plug, but exploring something like a HubSpot or even the resources that HubSpot has. There are so many free resources out there that can help at least get these conversations started or guide some of these brainstorming sessions. And so
absolutely.
Google's your friend. Like you can't overlook it. There's tons of resources out there that can help. But a tool like HubSpot could help as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I'll shamelessly plug it too. We've been using HubSpot for a while, and it definitely can help with that sales and marketing alignment for sure. It's really valuable to have customer information in one place and be able to, create campaigns with sales enablement in mind. And I know HubSpot takes that seriously. So yeah, Hailey, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Where can people find more about you, or if they're interested in HubSpot, how do they reach out to you?
Yeah, for sure. So you can find more about me on LinkedIn. I would love to get connected. I'm sure whenever Joseph posts this, I'll go comment and plug my LinkedIn. But I'm usually on there pretty often. And yeah, if you're interested in learning more about HubSpot, highly recommend just checking out our website. And you should be able to contact the correct folks through the website or through any of the product or service pages for sure. But LinkedIn's the best place to find me, as I'm sure it is for you too, Joseph.
Absolutely. Yeah. Find me on LinkedIn. Maybe too much. All right. Well, Hailey, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. I really appreciate it and look forward to future conversations with you.
Appreciate it, Joseph. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to The Strategic Marketer wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you could do me a personal favor and hit 5 stars on the rating, you don't have to leave a full review, just hit 5 stars. It would really help me out. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of The Strategic Marketer.